I am so excited to be talking with you about the film Good Boy that came out. I think it premiered at South by Southwest last year. Was that the case?
Yeah, and it was an incredible experience at South by that we all went, the post team, production team, everybody went, including Indy.
Yeah.
And he was kind of the star of South by. He had his own Instagram page that South by created for him.
That's incredible. What a movie. What a movie. I remember the buzz around this movie and how much hype there was because of the concept and the approach to it. And so I'm looking forward to talking about your contributions to this film as the composer. Um I have to start by asking, I'm very curious. Are you a dog person?
I am 110%. I actually, this might be a little TMI, but my mom birthed me at home, and her dog was there in the room with us at the time, Cosmos. So from the get go, I've been a dog person.
That's awesome. I couldn't help but wonder, I mean, obviously being on set, being a dog person is probably a really important component to the job. But do you think that being a dog person influenced your approach as a composer?
Yes, in the first way, when I first got the rough cut from Ben Leonberg, our amazing director, I watched it through with some temerity because I was like, I really, really hope that the dog doesn't die. I didn't know yet what the outcome was. And I was like, I'm not going to take this job if the dog dies. Like, I cannot write a dog death scene. I don't know how, the composer for Where the Red Fern Grows or Old Yeller was able to do their job. Uh, they either had to be shutting off that part of them or they were a little sociopathic. Sorry.
That's funny. I think we were all concerned about Indy's well-being throughout the whole movie. I think that's one of the things that really works with it is like, is it going to go there, or are we going to have a more favorable ending for this dog? And so I think that's interesting. That you had that experience and you were able to kind of go through it the way the rest of us did, wondering what was going to happen. Um,
Absolutely.
Speaking of Indy, and I guess as the main character here, one of the things that really struck me with how the movie starts is that this is a horror movie, but it has interesting emotional beats to it. It really is about this connection between a man and his dog, from the dog's perspective, which means that this movie opens with a very heartfelt opening montage that you have to create music for. I'm curious about your approach to that, balancing horror with sentimentality.
That's such a good question. Thank you so much for asking about that. That particular montage, we went back and forth on a bit because I think I wrote 7 or 8 versions of it, and we wanted to kind of codify the majority of the instruments that you were going to hear in the film. But it's really Todd and Indy's theme, and so that was our main goal for that montage was to give the audience a sense of what their connection was musically and have it be a really positive, heartwarming introduction to the two of them and their relationship.
Mhm. And I think it works so well. I mean, one of the reasons that this movie does have such an impact on people isn't just because it's a horror movie and it kind of has that visceral effect, and that suspenseful effect, but also because you're invested. You're invested in this relationship, and in the well-being of both characters here. A lot of that has to do with how that opening sequence plays out, especially when it comes to the music for it. But with you as a composer here, one of the things that is very prominent in the music are strings.
Mm.
Uh, Heavy strings, ominous tones. I want to start with what influences your style of composing.
Oh, so many different things. I think that I'm first and foremost, I was raised as a classical cellist. I started playing cello when I was 9 years old. And so my whole musical philosophy kind of is filtered through strings and is filtered through the cello. And I've been exposed to so many. I was really, really lucky to have parents that loved all kinds of art forms, and all kinds of different music. And so growing up, I had anything from like uh, Miles Davis and Chet Baker, on listening to things, all the way to like The Orb, which is a UK based techno, like experimental electronica, and then of course orchestral things and opera. And I trained for a long, long time to try and be an orchestral cellist, and eventually the end of that road found me, and I needed to make a pivot, because it's so competitive at the top there, and finding a job in an orchestra is really, really challenging, right? Those folks that do end up winning those jobs are just the best of the best of the best. And so my ideas about creation all come from storytelling, and through collaborative art, I feel like my role in whatever the collaboration is just can be uplifted by these other art forms that are influencing the things that I'm doing. So very much my composition philosophy is collaborative. I'd like to pull in as many different perspectives as possible, from the creators, that we're all together making this sum of our parts even greater than the whole, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I should say. I keep screwing that phrase up. Um, but yeah, everything's very much translated through the strings because that's where I started. And then I even built an instrument that's based around strings for the soundtrack and for the palette of the sounds that we're hearing.
What do you do with that instrument now? Do you still use it?
Yes, I do. I've sampled it. It's actually in the like sample libraries of a friend of mine. John Woodruff just created a new synthesizer. So it's a micro synthesizer, and he had a lot of artists contribute different sound libraries to that. And I went over to his house and recorded about an hour and a half of cello and an hour and a half of what I call the celoscillator, which is basically an 8-string spinning zither that rotates, and you can touch it with like all kinds of different instruments, or rather like bows, cello bow, or a loose hank of cello hair, or even a chopstick. I can hold that over it and get some really cool percussive qualities out of it.
Huh. Very interesting. I would love to see this instrument at some point. This
For
sounds
sure.
really cool.
I have a video of it on my website. I will share that with you immediately after.
Yes, please send that link. I'll put it in the description. That'd be awesome. Talking about you and your experience, we're off the beaten track of Good Boy a little bit. We're going to come back to that, but since we're on you for now, I do want to talk about a little bit more of you as an artist. I'm looking at your website, and it says producer, composer, voice actor, writer, teacher. Oh my gosh, so many hats you wear, so many different things you do. Talk to me about being a multifaceted artist, creator, creative.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like everything that I've learned in my life somehow influences my artistic output. And there's different seasons for me for different things. Um, when I wanted to start composing more, I really acknowledged that I'm not in this by myself. There's so many, like I was saying before about collaborative art, nothing that we do is in a vacuum. I want to be involved with other people when I'm making something. Um, and so sometimes it's a way into a certain medium I feel more comfortable or confident with the company that I own or co-own and run. We produce fiction podcasts, so audio drama, TV for your ears, basically. And through that vehicle, we all four of us wanted to explore different parts of our artistic life that maybe we hadn't gotten the professional opportunities to do. So up till that point, I hadn't really composed a lot. I had done some acting. I won a couple of awards when I was very young for stage acting prior to um, leaving my public school, high school, and going up to Interlochen Arts Academy, where I finished my high school degree. I did my junior and senior year there. And they kind of made me choose at the time between acting and cello. And so I had to make this kind of artificial switch, you know, and put a weird dividing line in myself. And that was tough, but I loved those 2 years that I was there because I got to meet so many other people that were just as inspired as I was to create and to do their art at a really high level and to want to learn from others. So many of the hats that I wear are based on necessity for the project, but then also based on a place of growth that I know that I could deliver something that I haven't yet done, and I believe in myself, and so I just want to try that and experiment with it and see what happens. And luckily, the collaborators that I've worked with, we've all been so supportive of each other, trying these new aspects. Our main writer and director, he and I met on an orchestra tour to China. He's a bass trombonist, and I was playing cello, and we were in a New York-based orchestra, and we really hit it off as friends, flying to China and experiencing this 2-week tour over there. And he went from the very stable career of trying to become an orchestral bass trombonist to being a screenwriter.
Mm.
You
Oh,
know, so he pivoted from one place that's really challenging to another, and we all supported that change and that growth from him, and in turn they have supported my desires to try all of these different things as well. I hope that answers your question. Very
it
long
does.
walk.
No, it does, and I really appreciate what you're talking about, that collaborative effort. I do think, like, a lot of the best creative work comes from working together and working with others, and also the spirit of growth and the spirit of experimentation and trying different things, yeah, I think that that's incredible. Um, I'm curious, with Good Boy being a horror movie, I I don't wanna pigeonhole cello as, like, a horror, oriented instrument, right? But it is pretty heavily used in this movie, but that makes me wonder, as a cellist, where does horror fit in your wheelhouse? You pulled this movie off so well, which makes me wonder, how much better are you in other, styles of music? That's what I was wondering about.
Thank you so much. That's a really good question. I think that cello, because it is the most, I'm going to say something, it's probably not super controversial, but I think the cello is the most usable instrument because of its range. It's so moldable. You have the very lowest low sounds that it can make, all the way up to the highest, like coloratura soprano ends of sounds, and then you can get all these incredible experimental, very strange, ethereal, ghost-like sounds if you do certain techniques with the bow and the string. There's a particular technique called sul ponticello, and then that's kind of a fancy Italian term, which means like pushing the bow very close to the bridge and either moving very quickly and light, or you can move slowly and heavily, and you get very different, full range of possibilities of like almost sound design, you know, supernatural sound design. And when I was speaking to Ben Leonberg, the director, about the film, uh, and we were first discussing a lot of the sound palette and what we wanted to do with that, talking about the cello's abilities and talking about these areas of sonic experimentation really led us to the conclusion that we were going to inherently make the soundtrack and the sound design somewhat indistinguishable at times.
Mm.
So the cello just lends itself to these possibilities that so many other instruments, for sure, there are ways to get other instruments to make a plethora of alternative sounds, but I think the cello just is very easy to come up with myriad possibilities.
That's an interesting transition into this next question I have, which is about the anatomy of a jump scare.
Mm,
You were just mentioning how, you were talking, about, melding kind of sound design and music. And of course, this is a horror movie, and there are a couple jump scares, right?
yeah.
Which sound has a lot to do with. Talk to me about what we as an audience should know about music and sound when jump scares happen.
This is such a good question. We had a great time, and I learned so much about this from Ben, from our director, because I thought in the early setup of a lot of the jump scares that you wanted to like include maybe a spooky tone, something that's low, like you said earlier, low ominous tones, right? Something that's like there to kind of clue the audience in that like, hmm, something's about to happen. But no, actually, the opposite is really the thing that we want. We don't want to give that away. So at times, there's ways. Certainly, if you look at the film, almost none of the jump scares are preempted by any kind of either sound or um, sound design or soundtrack sound.
Mhm.
And to me, it's almost like if you listen to a lot of EDM or electronic music, the bass drop, right? Where there's a gasp of silence right before the bass drops. Um, the trick with a jump scare is to not let the audience know where that bass is going to drop.
Mm.
It's like pulling the rug out from underneath your feet after you've already had this moment of silence. So you're prepped. Something is like amiss. There's nothing there. And then all of a sudden, boom, you get hit with the scare. And it's a visual and an aural at the exact same time. And so making sure that that's frame perfect, that's a huge part of it as well. But such a good question. And I actually had 6 or 7 of the jump scares that we had to just cut all of the music beforehand because I had prepped it way too much and the audience was really going to know what was coming.
That is so fascinating. That is a transition. It's like you're reading my notes. That is a transition into probably my last question. We have to wrap up here in a moment, but obviously a composer, you're working with the music and you're working with the tone and the feel of scenes. But what I also find really interesting is when a movie is very selective about when it uses music. And so what I want to ask you is your perspective on the use of silence or the use of or maybe not the use of music in a movie and how you guys approach that here because there's a lot of times where music is not a part of what's happening in the scene. That's a decision you had to make.
Yeah, great. Again, you have such good questions. Oh my gosh. Um, this is fantastic because this was another good discussion throughout the course of the creation of the film. Um, music only gains its relevance and only gains importance because of silence.
Mm,
And let me go a little bit deeper with that and explain what I mean. Almost nobody who has heard Beethoven's Fifth Symphony actually knows what the beginning of that symphony starts with. And it is an eighth note rest. Everybody
oh,
thinks that it starts as a ba 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 ba, and that's where we begin, is the note itself. And they might think it's a triplet into the downbeat of the first measure, but it isn't. It's actually an eighth note rest and then 3/8 notes, and then we start. So there should be this almost shock of silence before we get the first note. And that to me shows you the level of understanding that these old composers had of why silence is so valuable. And it's the negative space to the positive space in a visual medium, right? Like nothing would mean anything if everything was color or if
mm,
everything was white or if everything was
mhm.
totally black, there would be no ability to have any sort of depth perception or any sort of meaning
Mhm.
behind what the shape is that we're seeing. And so it's the same thing sonically with music. It only gains relevance because of the silence. And so I think that it's my job actually to justify where music should be and allow silence to be everywhere else.
I love that. I love that answer. I feel so much more educated now after this conversation.
Oh,
I think that's
thank you.
incredible. Thank you so much for your insight there. Good Boy is now available on VOD. I absolutely recommend it to people, and I have even before this. It was such a fun and thrilling, kind of suspenseful experience. So all my horror friends, when they need a recommendation, I always say, "Have you seen Good Boy yet?" Um, but for people who haven't seen it yet, as my like final question here, what would you tell new audiences to set their expectations before going into this movie?
Yeah, I would say that if you're coming into it totally fresh, Good Boy is a flip on the trope of the haunted house trope where the family moves in and the dog is pointing at something strange in the corner. And then, because of the dog's demise, the family realizes something's wrong. No, the
Mhm.
dog in Good Boy is a good boy. He's the hero. And we follow his perspective the entire time. And it is so unique. I cannot say enough about Ben Leonberg's direction and his choice in camera work and cinematography. This is a unique horror film shot from the perspective of the dog. And I think that if you're at all a dog lover, you will find a lot of, for sure, suspense and some thriller aspects, but a hopefully a cathartic and um, beautiful ride to the
Mm.
end.
I love it. I love it. Sam, thank you so much for your insight, your experience with your work on this project, Good Boy. I like I said, I'm recommending it to people, and I'm going to keep up with your career. I'm looking forward to seeing what else you have going on. Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, and thanks for dealing with all the background noise and everything that's going on. But
It is.
thank you for having me, and I hope that ForReel has an amazing spring and summer.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.